and welcome to another episode of the Hey Girl podcast. We're your hosts, Bethany Needham
and Laurie Casagrande.
And each week, we get to share with you stories from women of all ages and stages of life who are following Jesus right where they're at.
Our prayer is that each story encourages you to run your race in your place.
In today's episode, I get to introduce you to my real-life friend, Alyssa Bell. I met Alyssa years ago at a summer camp where my husband was serving with his band leading worship and Alyssa was on staff full time. From that moment all the way until now, I would have had no idea how many different ways God would bring our paths together, but it's been quite the adventure, and we are so grateful. The Needham family could not do what we do without Alyssa, for sure, with all of her help, with our greenhouse conferences, to now her being on staff at Berea with my husband, Andy, and just the incredible work that she does there. In this interview, we talk all over the map, from marginalized single dog moms to burnout and ministry. And I guarantee you, no matter where you're at in life, God has something for you in this story. And so without further ado, I am so excited to introduce you to my friend, Alyssa Bell. All right, girls, I am here with my friend, Alyssa Bell, and Olive, her little fur baby. I love that she just climbed on my lap right as we started.
I know. She was, is it time to be...
I think she's meant to be a podcast dog.
I've been saying that for so long.
So, Alyssa, I mean, on a scale of 1 to 10, what are the chances you might start a podcast with Olive?
I would say it's probably a 12 to 15, somewhere on that scale. I mean, as you and I were talking about earlier, I mean, I don't want to use any trigger words or anything, but I really feel marginalized as a single dog mom. And I feel like if I can give a voice to other single dog moms who, just constantly make up nicknames for their dogs and can't stand to be away from them for a whole work day and all of that kind of stuff. I mean...
And I'm looking... So what is she wearing? Right.
She's wearing a Thunder shirt.
These are dress shirts, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
She's just been strangely anxious lately, probably because I think for the last 2 out of 3 Fridays that Mama has gone to work, one of the smoke detectors or CO2 detectors, the batteries have died. And so I come home and it's chirping. And one day she was sitting in the shower, trying to get away from it. It was so pathetic. So she's just been really anxious. So
Olive, your life is so hard.
I know. Thank you for noticing.
I know, seriously. So I love your dog, and I think that this will mean a lot to single dog moms out there. You're our first single dog mom.
No.
Yeah, I know.
Wow.
I know, which pretty much proves your point that you're kind of marginalized.
I know. Okay. I just feel like people don't talk about it.
I'm glad that you came on here.
Thank you.
To bring it up. So, our listeners are probably wondering, what in the world did I just sign on to? You're welcome. There's also another community of dog moms out there that are finally.
I know, finally someone to share all about, my identity, number 1, dog mom. Number 2, follower of Jesus. No, I'm just kidding. Vice versa. But it's pretty close.
That's the most amazing thing I've heard all day. Basically, you leave the house and you have to remind yourself, I'm a Christian first. Yes. I'm a dog mom second.
Right. Jesus is calling me to this job that I'm leaving my dog at home for.
It's a big deal.
She
has to wear a Thunder vest in order to get through it. So that's a pretty big deal.
I know.
Well, Alyssa, you and I, we go a little ways back. And more recently, which will fill a lot of people in, but you have done some work with my husband in conferences that we do. You are kind of a legend in the Needham home.
Whoa.
I know. I don't even say that lightly. Alyssa is... People think, Needham's greenhouse events, and we get all this kind of we're so grateful that you guys do what you do. But I just want to go on the record to say that every time someone says that, I'm thinking in the back of my mind, actually, if Alyssa was not Alyssa, these wouldn't exist. So
you're sweet.
You're kind of a legend. And then second to you is my son, Josiah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Who I'm already emotionally preparing myself for the day that he gets a job and is not able to basically be my right-hand man.
I know.
As a volunteer. When Shauna left, that was tough, but when Josiah leaves, I just don't know.
It's a real thing. So we love you, and we've gotten to know you in a lot of different ways. But our listeners, there might be people that have not heard your name, which is ridiculous to me. But for those crazy people out there that are like, who's Alyssa Bell? And also, who's Olive, now that we've introduced your adorable doodle. So Alyssa, tell our listeners a little bit about yourself.
Well, currently in this phase of life, I am living in rural, central-ish New Hampshire, and I'm working for Berea. I work with Andy. Part of my responsibility is like, yeah, what you were saying. I run admin and volunteers and kind of on-the-ground details for all of our conference events, while Andy handles all the big picture dreaming and like that kind of stuff. I carry it, but he casts it.
I gotcha.
Yeah.
I love that imagery.
Yeah.
He casts, I carry.
I mean, he does a bulk of carrying as well. When there's just two of you doing most of the work, like it's...
You're just throwing him a bone because I'm sitting here, right?
Andy, don't hate me. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, and then I get to do some stuff on site too, and... Yeah, I'll talk about that, I guess, a little bit and some stuff that I'm learning or growing into. But I'm from Western Massachusetts, so a little town just outside of Amherst, which is where UMass is. I grew up there with my lovely family. I have a younger brother and 2 loving parents. I guess kind of my faith story starts when my parents, for some reason that I still don't understand, sent me to Bible camp for a week during the summer between 5th and 6th grade. I think it's honestly, like, my parents, they both grew up Catholic. They grew up in the Catholic tradition, but they got married after my mom graduated from college, and it wasn't really an important, integral part of their lives. It's not that they're adverse to spiritual things, so I think they were kind of like, well, I'll get the kids out of the house for a week, and it's a church thing, but that's fine. So they sent me there, and that was the first time that I had heard about Jesus outside of the idea of like Christmas and Easter probably. And even Easter was probably primarily about like eggs and Easter bunnies, which obviously ties into Jesus really well. So
makes sense to me.
Yeah. And so it was a place that I left with a lot of questions about spiritual things. It was also the first place that I feel like camp was the first place that I felt like I belonged anywhere. So, it was like, I was in elementary school, but I felt like I had friends, but not people that I had connected with. And for the first time, I felt like I'd connected with these people. And the worst part was that I didn't get to go to school with them. They were only people that I got to see for 1 week during the summer. But basically, I left and I went home, and not much changed in my life, but I went back to camp every summer. It took many years. I can't do the math between 6th grade and 16. 5 years?
A lot of years.
Okay, yeah,
We'll
just like
that.
Almost an eternity. But that summer, right before I turned 16, was the first time that I feel like the gospel message finally clicked for me. Like, that I finally understood not only the depths of my brokenness, but also why I was feeling all of this inner turmoil and darkness and sadness and apartness. Like, so that was the time that I met Jesus. So it was really a long process of understanding. So I continued to be involved in that camp, but as I grew as a disciple, I also grew into some more leadership roles there. So I started volunteer counseling and all of that kind of stuff. And while Jesus became a really big part of my life, it wasn't a big part of my family. I have one brother who he also went to camp with me that first summer, and he hated it. He tells this story that my mom, she loves to, now that I work in camp ministry, loves to ask me if we're having the meeting where we make all the kids sit around the campfire and they can't go to sleep until they say that they're Christians. Because that's literally the story that my brother, that's what he took away from it, I guess, as a 4th grader. And I was like, I don't remember things.
Nobody leaves this fire pit till everybody knows Jesus.
Exactly. No sleep.
I have a feeling there was some sort of connection made with the fire pit, and your options are Jesus or fire.
Exactly.
And take your pick.
Yeah.
Because every 4th grader is like, I don't know, fire looks kind of fun.
I'm a 4th grade boy. I think I'll choose a fire. But yeah, so while Jesus became a really big part of my life, as I started learning for myself what that looked like and what that meant, it wasn't a part of my family. And so I think when I turned 16, it was a huge deal. But when I finally started driving myself, it was a really big deal because I could actually go to church.
Oh, because at this point you weren't.
Yeah, like
that wasn't part of your.
At this point, camp was my church community, but it was so seasonal. I mean, it was like a week during the summer and then a couple of weekends during the year. And my parents are great, but they're kind of like, Sundays are for sleeping. Like, why would we get up and bring you to church? But so when I got my license, I could take myself to church. And so that was huge for the first time, like getting involved in a church and being plugged in and meeting other people who are believers and other people who weren't teenagers who were believers. Because, I mean, mostly at camp, you're surrounded by people who are your peers or who are your counselors, but they're just a little bit older than you. So that was really, really huge for me. And camp's been a big part of my story. So not only being involved like in leadership and on a volunteer basis at camp, but camp really gave me a heart for and a vision for service, I think, of other people and what it means to invest your time in caring for other people. And so after I knew that God was calling me to do something different the year I graduated from high school, and so I ended up going on a short-term mission trip. It was supposed to be, it was the year that Hurricane Katrina happened. And so I was supposed to go to New Orleans to do like a relief trip, and that ended up getting canceled. So last minute I went to Panama for 2 weeks and we did like drama evangelism and like hut-to-hut evangelism stuff. And that was a really eye-opening experience for me. I mean, you know, I'm just graduated from high school, and for the first time I'm from like a middle class, like pretty affluent area. And for the first time I'm seeing what poverty looks like. And just
that's
how
like jungle.
Yeah.
It's not like
just
American poverty.
Yeah. And just like devastating. And so I knew God was calling me to do something different. And as I left there, I was like, man, I need to do this again. I need to do it in a different way, but I want to bring someone with me. And so that year I had started talking to my best friend, Mary, who I met at camp, talking about, hey, what's something we can do together? Because she had done foreign mission stuff before too. And I think we both had a very similar heart for that. And so that next summer we fundraised our butts off. I mean, looking back on it now, I'm like, I can't believe I did that at 19. But together we raised like $7,000 or whatever to go. Wow. I always tell people I'm not very musical. I played guitar for like 3 months. And then I sold the guitar. I was terrible. I was awful. And then
I did everybody a favor.
Yeah, let's just put that out there. But then I sold my guitar to go to Peru, which was a way better investment of the time and energy. And yeah, I was never going to be a rock star. As much as I wanted.
We all have that dream.
I know, like just someday I'll tour with LFO, who was my favorite boy band growing up.
They missed their opportunity.
Yeah, they really did. But back to Jesus. But so that next summer, we spent 6 weeks in Peru. And that was the time where I really felt like God placed a call on my heart for ministry. Like, what I want you to do is ministry. And in my brain at that time, I thought, well, then clearly that means I'm coming back to Peru. Like, that this is the exact context in which God wants me to do ministry. And so when I left and went back to start my sophomore year, like, it was hard because all I was thinking was, why am I going to college? This is so stupid. Why am I not selling everything I have and like going to Central America? That's where God's calling me. So it was definitely a really big time of struggling with that, of struggling like, what does this call into ministry mean? And I'm so grateful that like God put the people around me and the guardrails around me to be like, stop. No, that's not what I have for you right now. I think that glimmer really enabled me to finish college. Like, God's going to use this time. And as I started to finish up college, pursuing missions and ministry, I felt like, well, clearly the only way that you can do ministry is like to become a nurse and do medical missions. I mean, I'm not going to invest the time to be a doctor. Let's be honest. I don't have those brains, but maybe I'll be lucky enough that I could.
Ain't nobody got time for that.
No. That I could be a nurse. And so I finished up college and was like, no, God has confirmed this to me. He's opened doors. This is what's going to happen. So then I applied to nursing school and I didn't get in. And I was like, Jesus, what are you doing? Like, I thought that you had wanted this thing from me and for me, and that's not what he wanted. And so I went to work in the same job that I was working when I was in college, but I started full time. I think, again, just wrestling with this idea of what does ministry look like? And what does ministry look like when you're working the job that you were working in college and you're not that crazy about it anymore? Because I was kind of a glorified, like, gopher, basically.
I was going to say,
very
what
needy
was your
people.
job?
I was an office coordinator for like the rehab department in a nursing home. But basically that meant I was a personal assistant to 8 very needy therapists. And my mom's a physical therapist, so I'm allowed to say that they're needy. But they're super needy. And so it was a really rewarding job because it's a job where you get to work with people. But it was an exhausting job because you get to work with people.
Which is perfect preparation for ministry.
Exactly. I mean, it's weird, like, that Jesus would redeem that. But then kind of walking through this thing, well, why am I letting this idea of what I think ministry is bind me into what I think I should do? So I started pursuing going abroad to do missions, but just being like really open-handed with what that would look like. And so I was in the process of applying to go abroad with AIM, Adventures in Missions, when this camp thing happened. So this camp that I'd been connected to, that I'd grown up going to, that I still served at as a volunteer in the summer, the place where I had like met Jesus and been invested in as a disciple and a leader and just a human being. The director was like, hey, would you want to move on site and help us with some stuff on the weekends? You could live here for free. And I was like, oh, get out of my parents' house? Stop living in the basement? Sure, that sounds great. And the best part was I got to move in with a woman who had been my camp counselor. What? And so that was really, really fun. And this was just before summer camp started. Once summer started, I really just felt burdened to be there and was again torn because I was at this job and I wanted to be here. So basically I worked all day and then I came back and all night I was like doing the camp life thing. But that summer I talked to the director and I was like, hey, I feel like I'm supposed to be here. And we made it happen. So I took a part-time job in a full-time capacity and I quit my other job and I started at working at this camp. And again, not understanding or seeing what ministry would be or know what my context would be. And I was 23. Just a youngster.
Just a young gun.
Mm-hmm. And holy cow, like that was 7 years ago, but it feels like
I mean, I wasn't going to make you give your age, but you basically
well,
just
the
handed
cat's
that
out of the bag. I'm 30.
Because that is really, really old. Just, I mean, I just want you to know.
No, I know. I'm basically dead. I see the gray hairs, Bethany. I know.
You're going to need those needy therapists real soon.
I know.
Real soon.
Once I get my hip replacement next year, probably. But this thing happened. So I started working at camp and it was so great and it was so wonderful for about 6 months. And then I felt like I was finally doing what God made me to do in some way. And then this thing happened at camp and it has to do with other people. And so I don't want to share things that happen, but basically the leadership structure at camp completely fell apart. And what was left was me, a 23-year-old, and 2 other people who are very similar in age to me, and my roommate Miranda, who was like 30 at the time, to basically like carry this ministry that had meant a lot to us. And I'm always up for a challenge. So I was ready for it. I was like, you know what, we can do this. But the thing that actually made that season the most exhausting and the most difficult was the people who were around us. I just have never experienced gracelessness and like lack of mercy from other people as I did during that season. And it's really difficult to describe it was really hard because it drove a wedge between me and my best friend and a church I had attended, and where there was already so many emotions in play, to then have this like just feeling utterly abandoned by people thing, and feeling like really it was me and these 3 other people and we were all that we had in the world. As I mentioned, like camp became this community for me, and after camp I found community in church, and I loved church. And because it was like the Christian family that I didn't have. I love my family and I have so much fun with them in so many different ways, but we don't share this thing in common. So then to feel like the church betrayed me in this way, or like wounded me in this way, where it was like, I'm actually not as hurt by the things that this other person did as I am hurt by the things that you're doing. In that same season, because God is graceful, I entered into a church community, which I think totally changed my life. And that was Mercy House in Amherst, which I know you've talked to Bethany before, and my good friend Ashley, who they're both at Mercy House. And Mercy House was a place where I, for the first time, like, I think saw Christians without the Christian facade on. And the most beautiful thing was, I guess, just seeing people really walk with Jesus through really hard things and really great things, and being vulnerable about both those places. And as a person who had like just been wounded by the church, it was so healing to be able to walk through that. And I just think of all the people who have gone through something and either have been rejected by their church family or their community, or just not felt supported in a thing. And I'm just sad that everyone doesn't have a Mercy House, I guess, is basically it. So kind of a year went by, and it was a really, really hard year, but it was a year where I learned a lot. I saw a lot of things in myself. Like, my best friend once said to me, like, oh, you're one of the most loving people I've ever known. But then that year I was like, I know that's not true anymore. And I know that she thought that wasn't true anymore, because she saw like the dark uglies of the things that I thought and said about people. And even at the end of it, I did have this opportunity to this church where all this stuff had gone through. They had like a reconciliation service. And basically there was a time and a platform for people to be able to like get up and share.
Really? This was the one that you'd been wounded in?
Yeah. Wow. And I really didn't want to go. But my best friend was like, I really think you need to go, even just to sit there and listen. And it was so crazy. And it was really healing, but it was also really wounding at the same time. Because I think, like, it wasn't like I was going to walk away from there and everything was going to be great. I think there was going to be some things that were ripped open a little bit more. But
I was going to say, it's almost a little bit like dig up.
And I was really scared to what it might be, but I ended up going, and I got up front and was able to like blabber out. Basically, I had been hurt a lot, but I had also done a lot of hurting, and probably people didn't even know, like just the things that I'd thought and said, and even if it was just with me and a couple of other people. And so just like, bawled in front of the congregation or whatever. And
no big
NBD.
Deal.
Not a big deal.
I don't think I've ever heard of a church doing that. That is a big deal for them to like give an open platform to say, okay, we're gonna give you space to say the things where you've been hurt.
Yeah. And some of the things, it was like, why are you up there talking about that? It was, I mean, because it wasn't about just this specific instance that had happened, but it was kind of like, churches, I think, get a rap for like sweeping things under the rug, or like patting things on the back and being like, it's okay, we just won't talk about it again.
Yeah.
And it had just been a church that had been around for a really long time and had done that to a lot of things. And so there were like, it was just being used divisively within families and stuff like that. And so to be able to stand up and I think confess and see all of the ugly things and tell them about the ugly things that I had done in that really hard time, even though I felt wounded by them, I knew that I had done a lot of wounding too. God really showed that he had me there and a couple of other people there for a very specific time, for a very specific reason. Basically what happened was when things started to come back together and the crazy started to die down, the people that he'd surrounded me with started to leave. And that was because the season that they were supposed to be there for was over. But that made it really hard. So within the course of like 4 months, a couple that had lived on site, and then my roommate moved out.
Wow.
And I was the only person that was living on site. Now, this is where Olive comes into the story. Yeah, I got Olive within 2 weeks of my roommate moving out. And it was one of those things where I was like, oh, this dog's so cute. I should get her. And then I emailed the lady about her and she's like, well, that one's not available, but we've got this little runt left over. And at the time, her name was Chelsea.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, but then she was being fostered by a woman who was also named Chelsea. So then they called her Rosie. But I wanted a food name because food's a big part of my life. And so we went through a few, but Olive it was.
It's perfect.
Yeah, she's a perfect little Olive. But she came into my life, and I think one of the reasons I have such a crazy relationship with her is because she came into my life right before I entered, I think, the loneliest season in my life. And so for a while, I felt like it's me and you, doggy, against the world. God knew what he was doing when he gave me a little furry friend. And some people think your mom is crazy and weird, but guess what? They've never had dogs. And they just don't get it.
Or they've never had a dog like Olive.
That's true. I worked at that camp for a couple more years, and one of the things that's really hard about getting into ministry, especially when you're young, is that you're really excited and nobody helps you put boundaries up for yourself. At least that was my experience. So I didn't put boundaries up for myself. And so really what ended up happening was, after being in ministry for only a couple of years, which is, I think, the saddest and most pathetic part of it for me, was I was like 26 and totally burnt out. And I was like, how do people do this for 20 years? I don't understand. And when I say burnt out, I really mean like, I just had no more passion in me for my relationship with Jesus. I think I had just chosen doing things for God over being in a relationship with him. And I don't know if other people didn't see it happening, or maybe they did, but then just chose not to intervene or correct me or anything like that. But it just got to this place where I was operating, because I'd been operating out of my own strength for so long. I was just completely exhausted, and yeah, just feeling like my default when I'm tired or when I'm in a not healthy place is to try and control things. Yeah. Because I feel out of control. This is something I'm learning. I was butting heads a lot with leadership about decisions that were being made, and I started asking myself, like, is it time that I leave? But for me, I kind of didn't see another option, and part of that was just because this place had meant so much to me that, like, how could God possibly ask me to leave? This doesn't make any sense. But he did. And I remember I went on a personal retreat to another camp. Weird.
Wow.
Which, I mean, the great thing about working at camp is you have camp friends. So
got a lot of
I was like, hey, listen, I need a place to stay for a couple of days. And just really God being like, it's okay. It's okay for you to leave. But for me, I have a lot of fear of failure. And to me, it felt like I was leaving because I'd failed.
Because you weren't in a good place. It feels that way.
Yeah. I'd failed, like, in being a good Christian. I'd failed in doing this ministry thing. I'd like failed in relationships because there were people that I had unresolved things with. And I was like, okay, then I guess I'm supposed to leave. Okay, I'm just going to wait for you to, like, make it known to me what I should do next, because obviously you're going to have something lined up immediately afterwards for me. And kind of in this same season was when I started, well, I guess it was a little bit before that, but when I met Andy,
right,
he invited me to be a part of this thing, like, hey, would you want to help out running some admin for conferences? And just being able to be around that and kind of see the bigger picture of what God was doing. I won't say globally, but just in
regionally.
Right, regionally. I remember the first time being with Andy and we walked into a church to, like, see a church, and seeing a church that sat more than 100 people and being like, what is this place? They make churches this big? Like, where are they getting all the Christians? And
from down south, we ship them.
Yeah. That's how Olive came here too.
All the good
things come on tractor trailer trucks from Arkansas.
That'll preach.
Yeah, preach that. Yeah, so, and I just remember sending Andy an email, like, I think not long after the first conference that we did, and I was like, hey, I would not hesitate at all to do this full time. But then it got to a place where I was really feeling like, okay, maybe actually what I'm doing right now is not what I'm supposed to be doing right now. And I remember I sent Andy a really long rambling email that was all about my life and things that were going on and kind of what I was feeling. And his response, classic Andy, was like, thank you for this email. I have a lot to think about. And I was like, well, I think it was good. I don't know.
Because he's like, honey, will you read this email and tell me what you think? So he was waiting for me to...
I need help to process this.
Yeah.
And so at that same time, I told the camp that I was going to be moving on after summer was over, and I had started drafting on my resume and all of that fun stuff that comes with trying to get a new job. And Andy had a conversation with me, and we met over lunch to talk about like kind of the possibilities and dream a little bit about things. And he was like, he was in a season of transition too. Yeah. So, wondering what God was doing and what was next. And he was like, I have some things to think about and some people to talk to. And not long afterwards, he called me and he told me that Nate, who's the CEO at Berea, was interested in maybe hiring me for camp. I was like, oh, Berea? Oh my gosh. Because I worked at like a little camp and I'd known about Berea. Berea is much bigger and showier.
It's like the mothership. And
basically just being like, ugh. That was kind of my attitude towards, but I don't know why.
Because they were the big,
they're like
showy camp when you're a little camp that's just trying to survive.
Yeah, the big showy camp that has the money and all the people. And you're like, what the heck? But one of my favorite things is that I emceed an event, like a camping conference, right before I made the decision to transition out of my role. And I made this like big joke. We played this How Campy Are You game.
Gotcha.
And one of the things that told you how campy you were was if you'd worked at another camp. And if you'd worked at another camp in New England, you were even campier. And if you'd worked at another camp in New England and that camp was also Berea, you were like the ultimate camp person. But then I really ate my words later because then I became that person that had worked at another camp and then started working at Berea.
You were the campiest person I know.
Basically. I mean...
I like admire you in all the things I don't want to be that person, actually.
Yeah, I'm the least campy person I know, too. Yeah, but basically, I just kept waiting for the opportunity, and I had a conversation with Nate, and it was really great, and I went up to Berea, and we talked, and I saw what was going on, and I was excited, and then all of a sudden, this, like, doom came over me of, like, I'm not ready for this. I'm not ready. I don't want this, actually. I don't want to move away from my family. I don't want to leave my church. Kind of just like kicking and screaming about it and crying a lot. So I spent 2.5 hours crying on the way home. Afterwards, sent me an email that was kind of like, yeah, I don't know what I'm thinking or what I'm doing. I felt like God was asking me to slow down and to take a second. And actually, in between the crying, I called my friend Michelle on my way home, and she had just had a baby and was getting ready to go back to work after maternity leave. And I knew they were having a hard time finding someone to watch their little one. And I was like, listen, this is crazy. It's primarily crazy because I don't have any childcare experience. I'm the oldest of two, and my brother's like a year and a half younger than me. And I didn't grow up in church, so I didn't ever work in the nursery. I just went straight into youth min because I was a teenager.
So basically, your resume does not
line
up to be a nanny.
What are babies? Gotcha. I don't know. But my friend Michelle was like, this is really weird, but it actually feels really right. And so I left my other job, and then I just started nannying this baby for 6 months. And she taught me literally everything I know about babies, which is still not that much.
That's a little concerning for Michelle's baby. Just gonna be real.
Oh my gosh, but she's so cute and she's so sweet, and we still have. I don't know.
She's still alive.
She is still alive.
Okay, good.
And I don't know if she actually remembers me or if she's just like this with everyone. But she's like, oh my gosh, and she remembers Olive. Like for the first time, I think where I stopped working for God and had to sit in God's presence and like just be a believer and to be like to be an actual disciple, like sit under the teaching of Jesus and not just be like, oh, we're going this way. Okay, great. I'll take that hill for you, Jesus. Yeah. So 6 months of like not doing. And like, honestly, that 6 months was mostly a lot of pacing. It was a lot of pacing and waiting for God to reveal himself. But coming to this understanding that I was really afraid to make decisions and say things. And mostly because I was like, well, I don't want to leave my family and I don't want to leave my church and I don't want new friends and all these kinds of things. But Jesus, I'll follow you wherever you want me to go.
As long as it falls under this.
Yeah, as long as
pretty sure we all
I can
do
afford
that.
cheese from Whole Foods.
Oh.
And like I get to live in a 2-bedroom apartment by myself. Yeah, like I had said, God, I really want to follow you and I really want to serve you. But all of these things. And I had this really great conversation with Nate at an event because I was still helping run events even when things were kind of up in the air. And I told him, I was like, yeah, I think it's a no. And then I left that event and cried the whole way home. This is a theme. Every time I talk to Nate, I leave weeping.
Gosh, Nate.
I know. He's so harsh with his words. But he was just so supportive and so kind about the whole thing and was like, I want you to do what's best. And what's best is for you to obey what God's asking you to do, not for me to con you into taking a job. Man, like that was the first time I feel like someone cared for me in that way instead of trying to force me into a decision. Yeah, that this season's important and it's important to walk through these things and ask these questions. But then the next day I sent him an email and I was like, just so you know, I cried the whole way home. And, but mostly because I realized that I was making decisions based completely out of fear and like wanting to follow Jesus, but not wanting to do what he asked me to do. And so that was like a turning point. That was in November. And right before Christmas, I made the decision that I was going to take the job at Berea, which meant moving. And so I wrapped up some lovely things that I was involved with. I had started this thing with a couple of ladies at my church that we called Conversations Around the Table. And it was just, we had like hand invited 8 people to come and join us around a table and we would eat food and talk about what was going on in our lives. And it was just this really sweet thing that God had given me for this really little time, but I had to put a bow on it and leave it and move. And I started, actually February 1st is my 2-year anniversary.
Wow. You've been here 2 years?
Yeah, which is the longest and the shortest 2 years of my life, I'm pretty sure. But yeah, so I moved up here and it's only 2.5 hours from where I'm from, but it's felt like a lifetime away from things. And because it's hard, all of my friends, since I've moved here, they've had babies and bought houses and gotten married. I mean, most of them were already married, but there's just been a lot of things that I've been like, I see from afar instead of being there like I wanted to be. So very much like having to wrestle and do some mourning for that. But at the same time, since I've been here, God has, for the first time, I feel like in my life, he's given me this community of single people around me, which has been huge as a single person. It's a very weird season. I guess we're here. We're at present day-ish.
Yeah.
It's been a cool season, but a really hard season to struggle through. Like I said, it's been just about 2 years. And when I first moved up here, someone said the first year's really hard. And after 2 weeks, I was like, oh, they weren't kidding. But then a 1.5 years came and I was like, why is this still so hard? And then the other day I was talking to someone who just moved to the area about 3 years ago. She was like, man, the first 2 years are really tough. And I was like, I feel like after 2 years, people are going to be like, man, the first 5 years are really tough. Like it's just going to keep getting longer. I think 2 years really kind of has been the number for me where I finally found some community. I finally found some other people and I finally found a church. Life doesn't look like, even the community doesn't look like, the church doesn't look like what I thought it would look like if I was obedient and moved to New Hampshire. I turned 30 this year, and I think part of that has been reflecting on whether I really just want to live in the discontentment that I'm in because life doesn't look like what I want it to or thought it should or thought God promised it would look like, or do I want to like learn what it means to be content in those circumstances instead of just being like, well, I'm discontent and that's the way it's going to be until circumstances change. Mm-hmm. Being like, well, actually, how can I learn to be content in these circumstances?
So that's good stuff, because I feel like regardless of your circumstances, those words could apply. Like, okay, do I live in it? But for you, in your season of life, don't go too far down this trail, because I don't want to just torture you and you'll get all like, I picture you gazing off as you describe to me what contentment would look like. Don't let's not go into like fantasizing, but practically speaking, what do you feel like are some of just really basic, okay, like real talk, if I had my 100% way I was authoring this story, this is what it would look like.
Well, we'll just broach the big elephant in the room. I feel like I wouldn't be single at 30.
So a man.
Yeah.
Okay. Fair enough.
Yes. Yeah, like I would have met someone, or I was going to say someone's. I didn't mean that to be like, I would take multiple husbands if they were available. But I mean, like I would have met eligible men. I think also for me, community and people around me is huge. And I gave that up to move here and to be obedient in what I felt like God was calling me to do. But I also wanted to choose what the community around me looked like. And it was a bunch of people who feel like and act like me. So
you wanted a man and then a bunch of people like you as friends.
Yes, I wanted a man and then like just
like clones of you.
Yeah, exactly.
It sounds like an episode of Sister Wives, actually.
Well, okay, now it's time to approach that conversation. No, I'm just kidding. What I'm looking for is, that's so hard. Life doesn't look like what I thought it would look like at 30. There's a lie that as you get older, you get more independent. And what I've experienced has been exactly the opposite. That as I get older, I feel less and less independent. And I think part of that's just my understanding of God and my absolute need for him. But some of that's crippling too. Like, gosh, I'm 30. Shouldn't I be like more financially independent, or, well, yeah, at least have my own apartment, or like be meeting people, or, I mean, the nightlife here is not really great. There's 3 restaurants.
Yeah,
So?
I feel like I should paint the picture. We're in rural, like, New Hampshire.
Yeah.
How far do you drive to church?
Well, actually not far now, because I'm going, previously about an hour.
Right. And then you changed.
Yeah, and I just recently started going to church, which this is a whole other thing for contentment, but church is huge for me. And right now I'm going to a little teeny tiny church, but someone else I work with now had been going to that church, and she had said, oh yeah, well, it's kind of an older congregation. We just switched over from an overhead projector. And this was 2016. So I was like, well, I'm not going there.
You didn't want to run the slides on the overhead?
No. I mean, I am
job.
pretty good at pushing see-through paper, but I was like, well, I don't really think that place is for me. But I went to church an hour away for a year and a half, and then found myself being like, why don't I feel connected to any of these people? Oh, it's because I literally only see them on Sundays. And so I started going to that little tiny church that's like 15 minutes down the road, but it's with people that you see at the grocery store. And
first of all, it's interesting hearing you talk about going to summer camp where your community was just that once in a while, and then kind of transitioning to a more regular, and how that almost came full circle to now I'm going to this church an hour away, but I'm not seeing them on a regular basis. So it makes it very hard to build a relationship. And now God's brought you to this local community. I actually have a question. This is not one I put on. I've not scripted this. I know. I'm throwing you off here. How would you describe like your experience and your relationship with God, even in the midst of, because you were saying growing in contentment, like what is that relationship, just you and God? Because you've come out of a season, you've been through burnout, you've done all of that. What does you and God look like as things are? What is your relationship with Jesus? What does your connection with God actually look like, even though he has not handed you everything maybe you thought you were going to have right now?
so I've been on this journey lately with the Enneagram.
This is the second time this has come up.
Really? Okay. So it's really silly because I feel like I talk about it all the time, but I feel like really looking at it has helped me better understand the way that God has made me and the way that I connect with him. And so I'm a type 2 on the Enneagram, which...
Me too!
No! Do you have a wing?
I do, and I don't know what it is off the top of my head.
I bet you it's a 3.
I've been told that.
Andy's a 3 too, right?
Yeah.
So you guys would be...
Our wings are
flappies.
overlapped. We hold wings.
Oh my gosh,
I
that's so
know.
precious. So I'm a 2, which like the word, they called the 2 the helper.
Right.
But I'm also with a wing of a 1, which is the perfectionist. And so the thing that I've learned about being a 2 is it's great because I have this heart for service that God gave me, and I love to love people and doing things for them. But I also can use it and do use it to manipulate people. And I'll give something and expect something back. And I know that for a lot of my life, I've approached God in that same way. And I've been like, hey, God, I'm not going to get paid a lot of money. And I'm going to move to the middle of nowhere in New Hampshire. But what you're going to do for me is these 5 things or whatever. And just learning and understanding. Like, it's not a cute learning, too. It's like... It's the ugly learning. That's not how God operates. I read an article recently, and it was specifically about singleness. And the author said, singleness is God's best for me today. I just wondered, like, what if I looked at everything through that lens? Like, these things that we can perceive as being negative may just be God's best for us today. And that's because there's something that he's bringing us through. I can a lot of times approach singleness as negative. Like, well, how can this possibly be the best that you have to give me? But in God's sovereignty, like in knowing the gifts he's giving me are the good and perfect gifts that James tells us he will give. Trying to change the way that I'm looking at and seeing those things and be like, oh, maybe that is God's best for me today.
You just like preach the message of hey girl in a lot of ways. But really, like not looking at other people's journeys or their stories or their seasons of life and being like, well, God, why don't I have that?
Yeah.
And part of why I love getting the chance to talk to you is I think whether it's be church culture, culture in general, singleness versus, you know, married, dating, engaged, or whatever, that is often one of those things that one is held at this higher, I don't know, higher may be the wrong word, but basically, like, it's better to be married than to be single is kind of the unspoken and sometimes spoken thing, which isn't true. Like, nowhere, in fact, nowhere in God's word is it like, it would be better.
In fact, it might kind of say the opposite.
I think it might go there. And so much wisdom in what you just said, but it's so relatable for people to remember because I'm going to speak as a married person really briefly just to say that it can be tempting for married people to have that same heart towards single people because here they are in marriage, like, and whether it's a hard season, whether they're missing the parts of singleness that they didn't appreciate then, and now they're like, oh my gosh, it's gone forever, like kind of thing. And then they're like, why do they have that good and perfect? They get to be single and free and all these things. And I have this man that plays video games and was like, farts in his sleep. I don't know. Like, I'm not describing my husband historically. I just realized.
Oh, wait. Is that not based on true stories?
Hypothetically, I'm sharing this for a friend. Just kidding.
Like, maybe this friend has this husband.
Yeah, this husband that does these things. When the quote unquote sexiness of marriage wears off, and it can, you know, people can look and that, like, hey girl, honestly, this whole podcast, that's what we're about, is where you're at. I love that singleness is God's best for me today is like fill in the blank is God's best for you today.
Yeah.
I have really enjoyed watching your journey and hearing more about your story. It's kind of neat to kind of hear the background. And I know that you have in no way, you would not even say I've arrived and I'm here and I figured it out.
No.
But I just love that tone of you continue to pursue after God. Okay, God, I want to keep learning, even if it's ugly learning, even if it's not pretty learning, I want to keep learning.
Yeah.
Most of my questions you kind of answered, but there is one question that was not answered in any of that. I know. I know, but it's
tell.
it's the most important one.
Okay.
In
Ready.
all of this singleness, doggy mom, all of it, what is the actually the most superficial thing about you?
I really love food, good food, and I will pay money for it. Most of the people that I'm surrounded with normally, they're like, I'll eat the camp pizza. I spend $5 a week on groceries. Every time I say, oh, I need to go to the grocery store, Hannah, my coworker, goes, again? And I'm like, yeah, I go about once a week. Like, I feel like most humans do, but yeah. But yeah, I'm a snob. Like, I'll pay for good food and for good coffee. And
Yes.
what I wouldn't give for some good local frozen yogurt around this joint.
Amen.
I mean,
I just feel like the men that listen to this need to understand that you are not just someone who loves to serve and do ministry, loves Jesus, but girl can cook.
Okay, friends, that was my friend Alyssa. Didn't you just love her? We had so much fun recording, and even though it probably wasn't nearly as much fun for Andy, who had to edit out every single interruption of Olive, who was pretty determined to be the first dog on Hey Girl podcast, because it seemed like every time we started recording, she just needed to make noise and be heard. And so I hope that you gained so much from the conversation. A couple of things that stood out to me today. First of all, I really appreciated Alyssa's honesty talking about her journey, what it was for her to walk through being burned out in ministry. This is not the first time that we have discussed this or that it's come up on the Hey Girl podcast. And I don't think it's necessarily just people who work in full-time ministry, but in general, people who have gone through just a season of their life where they have overworked and done too much and really gotten to a place where they needed to recover, to recoup, to take a season of rest. And I'm not just talking about like normal rhythms of rest where you have seasons where you work hard and then you take time off or whatever. I'm talking about overworking to the point that it's kind of like your body and your spirit, everything just forces you to stop because you just can't go any further. And a couple of things Alyssa said that to me were just really insightful and also helpful for me as I think about people younger than me in ministry and how to encourage them and also how to lead them well. And she talked about that idea of being a young person with all this passion and zeal or whatever for ministry. You're like so excited, but people around you, other people in ministry, not helping you put up boundaries. And this was a little bit convicting for me because I for sure, like, not that I'm years and years and years down the line in ministry, but I've had times where, you know, you're serving, you're doing something, a young person comes in, they just seem to have all the energy in the world, and man, you just want to let them go with it. Like, please, I'm exhausted, you run, do your thing. And this idea of protecting them, of being careful to teach them in that process of, listen, yes, you have this energy and excitement, but you also have to be aware that you need your rest. It doesn't matter whether you're 16 or 65 in ministry, like you need times of rest. I just appreciated her sharing that, and it for sure has already and hopefully will continue to impact me as a leader as I come alongside younger people who are serving, whether at work, in ministry, whatever they're doing, to make sure to be that encouragement, to be one of those people that is looking out for them and their health and protecting them, even in the midst of their zeal and excitement and the energy that they have. The other thing I would say that I guess I really appreciate about Alyssa is the conversations we had around her being single and this season of life she didn't necessarily, I guess, plan for, or you know what, if she had planned it, it might have looked a little different kind of thing. But her, quote, singleness is God's best for me today. And I just love that. I loved her honest conversation and perspective around, you know what, I would love to be married. And that is something I thought would be a part of my life right now, but it's not. And really, truly believing and living out that singleness is God's best for me today, because this is where He has me. And I love that. We talk to a lot of people who are married, have been married, whatever it is. And I just really always appreciate when we have these women come on who can tell this story of, you know what? God is at work, not just in wives and moms, but also you single women out there. Like, this is not an in-between season for you. This is not just a preparation for you to become a good wife someday. Not that God won't use those things if He has marriage for you, but right now in your season of singleness, this is God's best. This is what He has for you. And what does it look like for you to run that race? Just fully run it and embrace it. I just love and appreciate Alyssa so much. I don't remember if we mentioned in the podcast, I feel like we didn't, but her and her friends actually do a podcast called Table for One. I'll make sure we link it in the show notes, but it's fantastic. If you are a single woman or maybe a single young man that listens to this, I've listened to a couple of episodes. Obviously, I'm not their, target demographic, but I love every single one of the girls that does the podcast, and I just loved it. I loved listening to them. They're hilarious, and I know you'll love it too. So Table for One, check out our podcast. It's so fun. And again, if you are single, this is a season of life. I hope that also is just an encouragement to you to hear from these other women who are running that same race right alongside you. So you may notice that it's a lot quieter and not as exciting right now because I'm missing my girl, Laurie, but real life conversation, guys. Laurie and I both have been in like straight out crazy schedules, all the stress, all the exhaustion. She's going hard at work and I'm kind of in the midst of work, but also I'm getting ready tomorrow to hit the road traveling and speaking. And so I'm on my own tonight. Well, other than my dog who's sitting here next to me, which you could probably hear her because her jingling collar is super obnoxious. But don't worry, Laurie's not gone for good. We have an appointment next week where we're going to sit down and do a whole lot of recordings. But for now, we wanted to make sure we got this episode out to you. And so I decided to fly solo. I know it's not as good. If you feel the need to send the feedback that it's not as good, you can. But just so you know, I already know. Either way, wherever you're at today, whether you're in a crazy busy season like Laurie and I, maybe this is a season of rest for you, whatever it is, we will continue to pray for you, and you're on our hearts that you will continue to be faithful in running your race in your place wherever God has you. And sisters who are out there, keep sending those messages. Let us know. How can we pray for you specifically? What is God teaching you? What are you learning from the stories that we're putting out there? It's a weird thing about a podcast. It can very easily feel like you're just talking to yourself, especially if you never hear anything back. But we love the messages that come in. We encourage you, keep sending them. Positive, constructive criticism, whatever it is, it's helpful to us because we're definitely still learning along the way. We love every one of you. We couldn't do this without you. And I hope your week from here to next Monday is absolutely incredible. We'll talk soon. Bye, girls.